The cold rain of Lagos beat heavily against the glass facade of the high-end boutique on Admiralty Way, but inside, the atmosphere was burning with raw humiliation. Ada stood perfectly frozen, her uniform damp at the knees, staring down at the pristine Italian leather heels of a woman who viewed her as less than human. BC sneered loudly, her voice piercing through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Look at this ordinary cleaner. Look at this peasant trying to touch my luxury bags with hands that probably smell like cheap local market fish. You do not know your level at all." Ada swallowed the bitter lump of tears rising in her throat, her hands trembling as she held the cleaning cloth, while the other wealthy customers in the store quickly turned their faces away in cold, unbothered silence. It was a brutal display of unchecked arrogance, a moment where wealth attempted to completely erase a person's basic human dignity. But what BC did not know, and what no one in that glittering showroom could have ever predicted, was that the wheels of consequences were already turning in the shadows. Within 48 hours, the cleaner BC had humiliated would become the key witness to a truth that could destroy the deal Bice's family expected to win, all because of an unexpected encounter with a vulnerable old woman in the pouring rain. You cannot afford to miss a single second of this deeply moving and powerful story, because the shocking twist at the grand corporate gala will leave you completely breathless. Before we begin this incredible journey of justice and human character, please take a brief moment to comment your current location and your local time right now, so we can welcome you to our global family. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, as your incredible support allows us to keep bringing you these profound life lessons that prove goodness always wins. It was Tuesday evening, and the clock on the boutique wall showed 7:43 p.m. Ada tightened her grip on the microfiber cloth, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the polished marble floor. Her late father's medical bills at the Lagoon Hospital had accumulated to about 5 million naira, a mountain of debt that crushed her chest every morning. She worked 2 jobs, surviving on less than 4 hours of sleep, just to keep her family afloat. To BC, she was just an anonymous uniform, a piece of living furniture that existed only to polish glass and mop up footprints. BC stepped closer, intentionally grinding her muddy heel into the very spot Ada had just cleaned. "See how she is looking down? She cannot even look me in the eye because she knows her poverty is a disease," Madame BC shouted, making sure every customer around heard her words. Ada did not say a word. She simply knelt down again, her knees pressing against the cold, damp floor, and began to wipe the fresh mud away. In that frozen moment, the silence in the luxury boutique was heavier than the thunder outside. Ada remembered her father's final words about maintaining her self-respect, no matter how empty her pockets were. She wiped the floor with steady, deliberate movements, refusing to let a single tear drop onto the marble. BC laughed, a sharp, metallic sound that filled the room, before turning toward the store manager who was hovering nearby like a frightened shadow. "Mr. Coker, why do you people keep hiring these local village girls to serve high-profile clients like me?" she demanded, tossing her designer leather clutch onto the counter. "If I see this low-life creature anywhere near this section during my next shopping trip, I will personally ensure my family pulls our entire major corporate account from this establishment." Mr. Coker trembled, his eyes darting toward Ada with cold calculation. He nodded quickly, bowing his head to appease the angry heiress. "It will be taken care of immediately, Ma. Please accept our deepest apologies for this disturbance." Ada felt the sting of injustice deep in her bones, but she remained silent. She stood up slowly, rinsed her cloth in the utility bucket, and walked toward the back room. The disparity between them was vast, measured not just in naira, but in the complete lack of empathy that wealth often bred. Beezy spent more on a single pair of shoes than Ada earned in an entire year of back-breaking labor. Yet, as Ada watched the rain pour down outside the small frosted window of the staff break room, she felt a strange, quiet peace. She knew that money could buy expensive garments, but it could never purchase a noble soul. Meanwhile, just 3 blocks away in the heart of Victoria Island, a very different conversation was taking place inside a secure, blacked-out luxury SUV. Tunde, the 34-year-old real estate mogul and CEO of the renowned Adebello Holdings, was loosening his silk tie. He had spent the last 7 years building a multi-billion naira empire, but the endless flattery of boardrooms had left him feeling completely disconnected from reality. His mother, Madame Bello, sat beside him, her hair beautifully silvered with age, looking out at the flooded streets of Lagos. "Tunde, my son, the corporate world has become too blind," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "You are about to acquire the entire Marina Hospitality Group for millions of dollars. But do you actually know the hearts of the people who will run it?" Tund looked at his mother, a look of profound respect crossing his face. "What do you suggest we do, Ma?" he asked, leaning forward. Madame Bello smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the streetlights. "We must step out of the high towers and see how they treat the vulnerable when they think no one important is watching." The plan was simple, completely free of theatrical magic, but rooted in human truth. Madame Bello insisted on being dropped off near the high-end shopping district alone, dressed in a simple, faded local wrapper and a worn-out cotton blouse. She wanted to walk the streets as an ordinary, elderly woman seeking shelter from the fierce evening downpour. Tunde protested at first, worried about her comfort, but he knew his mother's resolve was unbreakable. He agreed only after a discreet security team was positioned nearby, with an unmarked support vehicle ready to intervene if she was in danger. Madame Bello wanted enough distance to move naturally without being surrounded by visible guards. As Madame Bello stepped out into the pouring rain, holding a cheap plastic bag over her head, the stage was set for a quiet collision of destinies that would change everything. The rain outside did not slow down at all. It only became heavier, pounding against the zinc roofs of the nearby shops like a non-stop drum. Inside the back room of the boutique, Ada sat on a low plastic stool, her hands wrapped around a small ceramic mug filled with warm water. The manager, Mr. Coker, did not even give her time to rest her aching feet before he walked into the small room, his face looking very tight and stressed. He stopped right in front of her, tamping his leather shoes against the floor to show his annoyance. "Ada, you see what you just caused out there with Madame Bisi," he said, his voice coming out in a sharp whisper so the customers outside would not hear. "That woman belongs to the Adeyemi family, and her father controls major contracts across Lagos State. So why are you trying to ruin my market?" Ada looked up slowly, her voice very calm despite the heavy fear resting in her chest. "Sir, I was only cleaning the floor according to the schedule, and I did not intentionally cross her path." "Mr." Coker hissed loudly, waving his hand in the air to cut her off immediately. "Don't give me that rubbish explanation at all," he snapped, his eyes narrowing as he pointed a long finger straight at her face. "People like BC do not care about your schedule or your excuses. They only care about their comfort. And your job is to remain invisible while keeping this place clean. For this nonsense you played out there today, I am personally deducting 20% from your salary this month to cover the disturbance." Ada felt a sharp pain in her heart. because that 20% was exactly what she kept aside for her mother's daily blood pressure medication. "Sir, please, I am begging you in the name of God. My mother is sick, and that money is for her pharmacy bill," she pleaded, her voice cracking slightly as she stood up. Mr. Coker did not even blink. He simply turned his back on her and walked toward the door. "If you like, complain from now till tomorrow. But if I hear another word from you, or another complaint from a VIP customer, you will pack your bags and leave this boutique permanently without a single kobo," he said before shutting the door behind him. Ada sat back down slowly, the warm mug in her hand now feeling completely cold. The injustice was heavy, but in this city, she knew that the tears of the poor carried no weight in the court of the rich. She took a deep breath, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and refused to let herself break down completely. There were exactly 3 hours left before her shift ended at 11 p.m., and she needed to stay strong. She stood up, adjusted her uniform blouse, and walked back out to the main floor with her mop and bucket, ready to continue her labor in silence. Meanwhile, Madame Bello was walking slowly along the flooded sidewalk of Admiralty Way, her old plastic slippers splashing through the dirty puddles. The wind was fierce, pulling at the edges of her faded local wrapper and soaking her cotton blouse until it stuck to her skin. To any passerby, she looked like a helpless grandmother who had lost her way after a long day of selling small goods at the local market. She stopped under the narrow concrete awning of a closed pharmacy, trying to catch her breath while shivering from the cold air. Farther down the block, the unmarked support vehicle carrying Tunde remained within sight, while the security team monitored the area without drawing attention. Tunde watched through the rainy windshield, his hand tight on the steering wheel as his heart twisted with worry for his mother. He wanted to jump out and pull her into the warm car, but he remembered her strict warning before they left the house. "Tunde, if you interfere, you will never see the true nature of the empire you are building." Madame Bello adjusted the cheap plastic bag on her head and decided to move closer to the bright lights of the luxury boutique section, where the wealthy elite did their shopping. She knew that the real test of a society's heart happened when the clean and the unclean were forced to share the same space. Her knees were aching from the damp cold, and her steps were becoming heavier with every passing minute. She was not looking for money or gold. She was simply looking for a small corner where the rain could not reach her old bones. Just as Madame Bello reached the entrance of the bright boutique, BC stepped out through the double-glass doors, flanked by a security guard who was holding a massive golf umbrella over her expensive hairstyle. BC was complaining loudly about the weather, her voice carrying over the sound of the rain. As she turned the corner, she almost ran straight into Madame Bello, who had paused near the entrance pillar to squeeze the water out of her damp wrapper. Bissy jumped back instantly, her face twisting into an expression of deep disgust, as if she had just spotted a giant cockroach on her expensive leather shoes. "Hey, are you mad? What is this moving garbage doing on my way?" Bissy screamed, her voice cutting through the rainy night like a knife. "Get away from me before you stain my clothes with your dirty local wrapper." Madame Bello looked up quietly, her old eyes very steady as she looked into Bizi's furious face. "My daughter, please. I am only standing here for a few minutes until the heavy rain reduces, so I can find a bus." Bizi hissed so loudly that even the driver in the parked luxury SUV looked up from his phone. "Don't call me your daughter at all, you old witch. Who is your daughter in this Lagos?" she shouted, gesturing fiercely to the security guard beside her. "John, why are you standing there like a statue? Move this eyesore away from this entrance immediately before I call your managing director to fire you today." The security guard looked confused, his hand resting uncomfortably on his baton, because he knew it was wrong to handle an elderly woman roughly in public. But Bissy was already reaching for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen to make good on her threat. See this village woman coming to sit outside a high-end store where people spend thousands of dollars. Go back to your village, or go to the general hospital if you want to die of cold. But don't come and ruin the view for decent citizens," she sneered, stepping back to avoid any water dripping from Madame Bellow's plastic bag. Inside the store, behind the clear glass door, Ada stopped mopping, her eyes locking onto the scene unfolding outside. Ada did not hesitate for a single second. She dropped her mop against the utility bucket with a sharp clatter and pushed through the double glass doors before Mr. Coker could even notice her movement. The cold wind bit her face instantly, but her eyes were fixed on Bissy, who was still gesturing aggressively at the shivering elderly woman. Ada stepped right between them, her body forming a protective shield in front of Madame Bello. "Madame Bissy, please." "It is enough," Ada said, her voice steady and respectful, but holding a firm line of dignity that made the security guard step back. "This is an elderly mother, and the rain out here is too dangerous for someone her age to be pushed onto the road like this." Bissy stared at Ada as if a domestic animal had suddenly stood up and spoken to her in perfect English. Her face turned a dangerous shade of red under the street lamps. "Are you out of your mind?" Bissy roared, her voice rising above the thunderclaps, shaking the Victoria Island sky. "You, an ordinary cleaner whose salary cannot even buy the zipper on my dress, are standing there trying to teach me a lesson about human dignity. You must be out of your mind." Ada did not back down at all. She reached out and gently took Madame Bellow's shivering arm, feeling the old woman's hand trembling against her skin. "Madam, wealth is a blessing from God, but it does not give anyone the right to treat another human being like garbage on the street," Ada replied quietly, her eyes refusing to drop this time. Bissy laughed, a bitter, venomous sound that caused a few drivers from the parked cars to look out their windows. "We will see how far your big mouth takes you in this town," she hissed, pulling her phone out again to call the main office. Inside the boutique, Mr. Coker had already rushed to the glass door, his face pale as he saw Ada standing up to their most influential client. He threw the door open, his voice cracking with panic. "Ada, get back inside right now and pack your useless things. You are fired permanently from this establishment." He turned to Bissy, bowing low while holding his hands together in absolute apology. "Madame Bissy, please do not be offended at all. This girl is just a temporary worker from the village, and she does not know how to behave before important people like you," Bissy sneered, adjusting her wet designer bag on her shoulder. "Your store has zero discipline, Mr. Coker, and if this peasant is still on your payroll by tomorrow morning, consider our business partnership completely dead." Ada felt a heavy weight drop into her stomach, knowing that her only source of livelihood was gone in a single flash. Yet, looking down at the frail elderly woman beside her, she knew she could never regret her choice. She looked at Mr. Coker and nodded slowly. "I will pack my things, sir. But a workplace that demands you to lose your humanity just to keep a job is not a place where anyone can find a true blessing." She turned her back on the boutique, completely ignoring Bissy's arrogant smirks, and guided Madame Bello toward the small concrete bench under the pharmacy awning down the street. Inside the unmarked support vehicle farther down the block, Tunde watched the entrance through the rain-streaked windshield. The emergency transmitter his mother had agreed to carry allowed the security team to hear enough of the confrontation to know when intervention might be necessary. His chest heaved with a mixture of intense rage at Biz's cruelty and profound admiration for the young cleaner who had sacrificed her entire livelihood just to protect a stranger. He picked up his phone and dialed his chief security officer, Marcus. Marcus, I want a complete background check on the young lady in the boutique uniform who just stepped out on Admiralty Way, he commanded, his voice cold as ice. Find out her name and how we can contact her lawfully. I want to help, but no one is to invade her private records. Madame Bello sat down heavily on the concrete bench, her breath coming in short, tired gasps. Ada quickly took off her own dry staff jacket, leaving herself in just a thin camisole, and wrapped the warm fabric carefully around the old woman's shoulders. Mama, please drink this, Ada said softly, pulling out a small plastic bottle of clean water she had kept in her apron pocket. Madame Bello looked up into Ada's face, her eyes holding a deep, penetrating gaze that did not look like the expression of a helpless beggar at all. My daughter, you just lost your job because of an old woman you don't even know, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Why did you do it? Ada forced a gentle smile, though her own heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces over her mother's medicine money. Mama, my father always told me that human life is the greatest property we can ever protect in this world. Ada answered quietly, sitting beside her on the cold bench. Jobs can come and go, but if we lose our souls just to satisfy the pride of the rich, we have nothing left to give to God. Madame Bello took a sip of the water, a slow, knowing smile touching her lips. Your father was a very wise man, my daughter, and his words are living inside you. What is your name? My name is Ada Ma, she replied, looking out at the endless stream of luxury cars rushing past them in the Lagos dark. The two women sat together in silence for 15 minutes, watching the heavy rain slowly turn into a light, misting drizzle. Ada reached into her small cloth purse and pulled out her last remaining cash, a crisp 1,000 naira note that she had saved for her own bus fare home to the mainland. Mama, please take this for your transport. The buses heading toward the terminal are still running down the road, she said, placing the money gently into Madame Bello's rough palm. Madame Bello looked down at the single note, knowing exactly what it cost a poor worker to give away her very last kobo. She accepted it with a deep nod of honor. Thank you, Ada, she said softly. God sees the clean heart, and he never forgets a debt of kindness. The light mist of the Lagos drizzle settled over the quiet street as a yellow local taxi slowly pulled up to the curb 10 meters away from the pharmacy bench. Madame Bello stood up slowly, the dry staff jacket that Ada had given her still wrapped tightly around her old shoulders. She turned to Ada, her eyes gleaming with a strange, deep intensity under the dim yellow streetlights. My daughter, let me get into this vehicle before the rain starts its madness again, she said softly, patting Ada's hand with a warmth that felt like a true blessing. Ada smiled gently, standing up to help the old woman open the taxi door, entirely unaware that the man driving the car was a private security operative working directly for Adi Bello Holdings. Remember what I told you, Ada, Madame Bello whispered. Just before she stepped into the back seat, a clean heart is a heavy currency that never loses its value in the marketplace of life. Ada watched the taxi drive away until its red taillights completely disappeared into the thick Victoria Island traffic. She stood alone on the damp concrete sidewalk, the cold night air hitting her bare arms, now that she no longer had her uniform jacket to protect her. The silence around her was broken only by the distant sound of horns and the rhythmic splashing of luxury cars driving past the glittering boutique doors. She opened her small cloth purse staring down at the empty space where her last 1,000 naira note had rested just minutes ago. The reality of her situations settled heavily into her chest, a physical weight that made it hard for her to take a deep, clear breath. She had exactly 0 money left for her own transport. Her 2-year employment at the luxury store was gone, and her mother's pharmacy deadline was less than 14 hours away. Ada took a long, deep breath, adjusting the strap of her worn-out shoulder bag, before she began the long walk toward the mainland, hoping to find a cheaper bus connection farther along the route. Every step she took along the wet asphalt felt like a heavy punishment against her aching ankles. But she kept her head held remarkably high. She refused to let the cruelty of Bissy or the panic of Mr. Coker break her inner spirit. She knew she had done the right thing, and in the real world, maintaining your humanity when everything else is falling apart is the only true victory a poor person can claim. Meanwhile, inside the massive master bedroom of the Adebello mansion in Ikoyi, Tunde was pacing across the thick Persian rug. The room was silent, except for the soft ticking of a vintage grandfather clock that showed exactly 11:24 p.m. Madame Bello sat quietly in a large leather armchair by the window, sipping a cup of hot lemongrass tea while her silver hair caught the soft glow of the desk lamp. Toon stopped his pacing, turning to look at his mother with a face that was tight with raw emotion. "Ma, I have never seen that level of unprovoked malice in my entire life," he said, his voice dropping into a deep, gravelly tone that showed his intense anger. "Bisi talked to you as if you were an animal that belonged in a gutter, and that manager stood there, bowing to her like a slave." Madame Bello set her teacup down gently on the glass saucer, the small click sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. "Do not waste your anger on Bisi, my son, because people like her are already trapped in the prison of their own arrogance," she said, her voice filled with an unshakable calm. "Focus your mind on the young girl who stood in front of me when the wind was blowing hard. She did not know my name. She did not know your bank account balance, and she had everything to lose by stepping out of that store. Yet, she gave me her water, she gave me her own clothing, and she gave me her very last transport money, without asking for a single document. That is the kind of character that cannot be bought with all the billions in your corporate accounts, Tunde." The office door opened quietly, and Marcus, the chief security officer, stepped into the room, holding a neat manila folder in his hand. He bowed his head respectfully toward Madame Bello before turning to face the young billionaire. "Chairman, we have completed the background check on the young lady from the boutique as you requested," Marcus said, his voice completely professional. "Her name is Ada. She is 24 years old, and she is the first daughter of the late Ni Okafor, a respected high school principal who passed away 3 months ago." Tunde's eyes narrowed as he took the folder, his fingers flipping through the neatly typed pages of the report. "According to the information we could verify lawfully," Marcus continued, "her father died after a prolonged hospital stay 3 months ago. Ada listed the boutique and a laundry service as her current employers, and a charitable liaison at Lagoon Hospital confirmed that the family had an unresolved treatment balance. I have not requested her medical records or any information we are not entitled to see." Tunde closed the folder with a sharp, heavy thud, the sound echoing through the room like a sudden clap of thunder. The room fell into a deep, frozen silence as Tunde looked down at the report, his heart twisting with a profound sense of justice. It was a clear, logical picture of a system that punished the good while rewarding the heartless. Ada was carrying the weight of an entire household on her young shoulders, yet she had willingly thrown away her only shield just to protect an old woman from Humiliation. Tunde looked across the room at his mother, who simply nodded her head with a slow, solemn expression. The time for silent observation was completely over. It was time to design a realistic, undeniable response that would measure every character by their true worth. Marcus, tomorrow morning, at exactly 08 a.m. I want our legal team to clear the entire medical debt at Lagoon Hospital. Anonymously, Tunde commanded, his voice turning into cold steel. Do not mention our company name or my mother's name to the management at all. Then, I want you to prepare the official invitation list for the Marina Hospitality Group acquisition gala on Thursday night at the Grand Continental Hotel. Marcus smiled a small, knowing smile and nodded his head. Consider it done, sir. What about Madame Beese's family company? Tunde turned toward the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the Lagos skyline with resolve. Make sure Bisi and her father receive VIP invitation cards to the front row, because they need to have the best seats in the hall when the true owner of the hotel finally steps onto the stage. By Wednesday morning, the Lagos sun had returned with fierce brightness over the mainland, completely baking the wet asphalt of the streets after the long night of rain. Inside a small, cramped room in Yaba, Ada was gently massaging her mother's swollen feet with a cheap herbal liniment. The small standing fan in the corner was buzzing loudly, struggling to push the humid air around the room while her mother looked down at her with eyes filled with deep, unspoken worry. Ada, my daughter, you did not sleep at all last night. After you returned from Victoria Island on foot, her mother said softly, her voice trembling slightly with age. Did something happen at the boutique with Mr. Coker? Ada forced a warm, reassuring smile onto her face, smoothing the edges of her mother's worn-out blanket. Everything is fine, Mama. I was just handling some extra inventory work because of the change in weather, so you don't need to worry your head at all. Just as she finished speaking, Ada's phone on the wooden table began to vibrate violently, the screen displaying an unknown private number. She wiped her hands quickly on a small towel and answered the call, expecting another angry demand from the hospital billing department. Hello, is this Miss Ada Okafor? A professional voice asked from the other end of the line, sounding very formal and sharp. Yes, this is Ada. How can I help you, sir? She replied, her heart immediately tightening with familiar panic. I am calling from the administrative office of Lagoon Hospital regarding the outstanding medical balance of 5 million naira for the treatment of your late father, Mr. Nii Okafor, the voice stated. Ada swallowed hard, her hand gripping the plastic phone casing tightly. Sir, please. I am begging you to give me until the end of the week. I am doing everything possible to gather the next payment. The voice on the other side paused for 2 seconds, before continuing in a remarkably calm tone. Miss Okafor, you do not understand me at all. Please listen carefully. At exactly 14 a.m. this morning, an anonymous donor cleared the entire balance of 5 million naira via a direct wire transfer to our corporate bank account. Your family's account is now officially at 0 kobo. The case file is closed, and we are currently preparing the final clearance certificate for your mother to sign. Ada stood perfectly still in the middle of the room, her breath catching in her throat as her mind struggled to process the information. Sir, please, who is this donor? What is the person's name? She gasped, a stray tear finally escaping her eye. We don't have that information at all, Miss Okafor. As the transfer was executed through a private trust fund with a strict non-disclosure agreement, the administrator replied before politely hanging up the phone. Ada dropped her hand slowly, the dial tone buzzing in her ear like a distant insect, while her mother looked up in confusion. Mama, the debt is gone. God has answered our prayers, Ada whispered, falling to her knees by the side of the bed, as the heavy burden of the last 3 months was suddenly lifted from her chest. They wept together, holding each other tightly in the dim light of the small room, completely unaware of how the wheels of karma were orchestrating their next move. By 02:00 p.m. that same afternoon, the atmosphere inside the main office of the boutique on Admiralty Way was incredibly tense. Mr. Coker was standing by the large display window, nervously polishing a crystal vase while checking his watch every few minutes. The glass door swung open with a loud chime, and Bissy walked into the store, looking completely radiant in an expensive silk jumpsuit and oversized sunglasses. Mr. Coker immediately dropped his cloth, rushing forward with a massive, flattering smile on his face to welcome her. "Ah, Madam Bissy, welcome, welcome, Ma," he said, bowing his head repeatedly like a servant. "I hope your morning was wonderful, Ma. And I wanted to personally assure you that the useless girl from last night has been completely dealt with. She is no longer on our property at all." Bissy removed her sunglasses slowly, her eyes sweeping over the immaculate displays with an expression of supreme satisfaction. "Good. Because people like that ordinary cleaner are like weeds, Mr. Coker, and if you don't pull them out early, they will ruin the entire value of your luxury brand," she sneered, tossing her car keys onto the glass counter. "My father just informed me that Ardebello Holdings has finalized the acquisition of the Marina Hospitality Group, including the Grand Continental Hotel, where our company handles all the interior decorations. There is a massive, exclusive gala happening this Thursday night, and our family has been given front-row VIP invitations to meet the billionaire CEO, Mr. Tunde himself." Mr. Coker gasped, his eyes widening with immense admiration. "Oh, that is wonderful news, Ma. The Adeyemi family is truly moving to the next level of global wealth." Bissy smiled arrogantly, tapping her manicured nails against the glass surface as if she already owned a piece of the city. "Yes, and that is why I cannot tolerate any form of disrespect from low-class workers who do not know their place in this society," she added, looking out at the street. "If we win the proposed $3 million interior contract on Thursday night, our company's portfolio will grow significantly, and we will probably buy over this entire block." Mr. Coker nodded vigorously, laughing in agreement. "Of course, Ma, people like Ada are just stepping stones for the rich, and they don't even have the brain to understand how high society works." As Bissy walked toward the VIP dressing room to inspect the latest arrivals from Paris, she felt completely untouchable, wrapped in the solid armor of her family's financial security. She believed that the world was built on a strict, unbending hierarchy, where money allowed you to write your own rules and treat the unfortunate like invisible dirt under your heels. But what she did not know, and what Mr. Coker could not have ever calculated, was that Marcus, the chief security officer of Ardebello Holdings, was currently sitting in a plain sedan across the street, watching their every move while making a brief note on his digital tablet. The invitation cards were already delivered, the stage was meticulously prepared, and the trap of accountability was about to snap shut. The sun was beginning to set over the busy district of Lekki, casting long, golden shadows across the concrete pavements as the evening traffic started its familiar crawl. Inside her small room on the mainland, Ada was neatly ironing a plain black cotton dress that she had borrowed from her neighbor for the upcoming interview. She had spent the entire morning searching through local classified advertisements, looking for any opening in a laundry house or a small school where her dignity could be preserved. Her phone, resting on the wooden table next to her father's old pair of glasses, suddenly let out a sharp, crisp chime to signal an incoming email. Ada dropped the heavy iron carefully onto its metallic stand, wiping her palms against her apron before lifting the device to read the message. The notification icon showed a formal, verified crest that belonged to the executive board of the Grand Continental Hotel, one of the most prominent hospitality establishments in Lagos. She opened the message with a slow, hesitant finger, her heart ticking quietly against her ribs as she began to scan the formal lowercase text. Dear Miss Ada Okafor, the email read, "We are writing to inform you that your name has been officially included in our private guest registry for the upcoming Marina Hospitality Group Acquisition Gala. This Thursday evening at 07 p.m. This invitation has been authorized directly by the office of the chairman of Adebello Holdings, and a secure corporate vehicle has been assigned to pick you up from your residence at exactly 05:30 p.m. on the night of the event. Please note that this invitation is strictly personal and non-transferable, and your access pass has already been coded into our security database." Ada rubbed her eyes quickly, reading the sentences 3 times over to make sure she was not losing her mind under the heavy stress of the past few days. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, her breath coming in short, quiet gasps as she tried to understand why a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate would even know her name, let alone invite her to a private gathering of the city's elite. She knew absolutely nobody in the high towers of corporate Lagos, and her late father's life as a school principal had never crossed paths with big real estate moguls. She wondered if it was a technical error in their database, a random glitch that would lead to another heavy humiliation if she showed up at the gates. But the detail in the email was too specific, displaying her full name and her exact residential zone with perfect accuracy. Ada closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's empty medicine bottles, and decided that she would attend the event, even if it meant standing in the back corner of the hall. A second line in the message confirmed that her mother was also invited, and that transport had been arranged for both of them. Meanwhile, inside the main boardroom of Adebello Holdings in Ikoyi, the atmosphere was incredibly sharp and focused. Tunde was sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table, his eyes fixed on a large digital screen that displayed the final seating arrangement for the grand ballroom of the hotel. Marcus, the chief security officer, stood by his right shoulder, adjusting his earpiece while reviewing a printed guest manifesto. "Chairman, the invitation to Miss Ada Okafor has been successfully delivered and confirmed through her private digital mail," Marcus reported, his voice dropping into a low, respectful tone. "Our transport division has already dispatched a black town car to her sector for Thursday night, and her seating assignment is located directly at table number 3, right next to the main stage." Tunde nodded slowly, a small, cold smile touching his lips as he leaned back in his leather chair. "What about the Adeyemi family and their daughter, Bisi?" Tunde asked, his voice completely level, but carrying a deep, dangerous undertone that made the room feel very quiet. Marcus tapped his tablet screen twice before replying. "Chief Adeyemi and his daughter have received their VIP passes this afternoon, sir, and they are completely ecstatic about the meeting. They have been assigned to table number 4, which shares a direct line of sight with Miss Ada's position and the central podium. They believe they are the preferred bidder for the proposed $3 million interior decoration contract, and Bisi has already spent the last 4 hours boasting about it to her associates on social media." Tunde stood up slowly, walking toward the large glass window that looked out over the ocean, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. Let them enjoy their illusions for the next 48 hours, Marcus. Because the weight of reality is a very heavy thing. When it falls without a warning, Tunde said softly, his eyes reflecting the deep blue of the water outside. A person who builds their entire life on the destruction of another human being's dignity must be allowed to reach the absolute peak of their pride before the floor is removed from under their feet. Madame Bello entered the room quietly from the side door, holding a small wooden bowl of fresh fruit, her silver hair looking incredibly bright under the modern ceiling lights. Tunde turned to face her immediately, his posture loosening out of deep respect. "My son, remember that this is not a night for anger or simple vengeance," she said, her voice rich with the calm grace that had guided their family for generations. "This is a night to show the world that honor is a living thing, and that God always protects the hands that are clean." Tunde walked over to his mother, gently taking the bowl from her hands and placing it on the conference table. "I understand you perfectly, Ma, and I promise you that everything will be handled with absolute order and legal clarity," he replied, bowing his head gently. "The Marina Hospitality acquisition is fully complete. The legal documents are signed, and our family controls exactly 85% of the voting shares in the new block. When the clock strikes 08 p.m. on Thursday night, every mask will drop to the floor, and Bisi will learn that the ordinary cleaner she tried to discard in the rain is the very person who holds the key to her family's financial future." The stage was now completely set. The actors were moving into their final positions, and the countdown was ticking down its last remaining hours in the dark. By Thursday evening, the grand ballroom of the Grand Continental Hotel was filled with a dazzling, golden light that reflected off the massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. It was exactly 06:45 p.m. on Thursday night, and the room was already packed with the most influential business figures, politicians, and socialites in Lagos. Soft classical music floated through the air, mixing with the low hum of expensive conversations and the clinking of fine champagne glasses. Bisi walked through the massive double doors, her hand resting arrogantly on the arm of her father, Chief Adeyemi. She was dressed in a shimmering midnight blue gown that trailed behind her on the polished floor, her diamonds catching the light with every step she took. She looked around the room with a supreme smile, completely confident that this night belonged entirely to her family's business empire. "Look at the crowd here tonight," Bisi whispered to her father, her voice dripping with unchecked pride as they walked toward the front row. "The Marina Hospitality Group acquisition is the biggest deal of the year. And once Mr. Tunde signs our contract tonight, nobody in this city can match our level at all." Chief Adeyemi nodded proudly, adjusting the embroidered collar of his traditional Agbada gown. "Yes, my daughter. We have worked hard to secure this position, and a $3 million contract with Adibello Holdings will seal our legacy permanently." They navigated through the crowd of bowing associates until they reached table number 4, which was decorated with fresh white lilies and silver nameplates. Bisi sat down heavily, tossing her silk clutch onto the table before looking across the narrow aisle toward table number 3, which sat even closer to the main central podium. Her eyes froze instantly, her face turning into a mask of pure confusion and sudden rage as she stared at the young woman sitting quietly in the third seat. Ada was there, dressed in a simple but elegant black cotton dress, her hair neatly braided into a smooth crown that gave her an aura of quiet nobility. She sat perfectly still, her hands resting calmly on her lap, entirely unbothered by the glittering luxury surrounding her. BC rubbed her eyes quickly, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the face she had personally kicked out into the rain just 2 days ago. "Father, look at table number 3, BC gasped, her voice turning into a sharp, venomous whisper that made Chief Adeyemi look up from his program. What is that useless boutique cleaner doing at a private VIP table in this high-profile gala? Chief Adeyemi frowned, looking at Ada's calm posture before looking back at his daughter. Are you sure it is her, BC? How can a common manual laborer gain access to a secure corporate event like this? It is her, father. I can never forget that poor village face, Busy hissed, her fingers tightening around her champagne glass, so hard that the glass began to tremble. This must be a terrible security mistake, or maybe she sneaked into the hall as a kitchen server to steal expensive items from the guests. BC stood up immediately, ignoring her father's warning hand, and marched straight toward table number 3 with heavy, aggressive steps that drew the attention of several nearby executives. Ada felt a shadow fall over her table, but she did not jump or look flustered at all. She simply lifted her eyes and looked calmly into Bice's furious face. Bissy stopped beside Ada's chair and lowered her voice. Ada, there has clearly been a mistake. This section is reserved for invited guests. Leave quietly before security becomes involved. Ada took a slow, quiet breath, her voice remaining remarkably steady and smooth. Good evening, Madam BC. I did not sneak into this hall at all. I was officially invited by the management of this establishment, and my name is fully registered on the guest manifesto. BC let out a loud, mocking laugh that caused the customers at the surrounding tables to turn their heads in absolute silence. Bice's smile tightened. 2 nights ago, you were cleaning a boutique floor. Do not embarrass yourself by pretending you belong on this guest list, she said. People nearby began to notice the exchange. Just as Bissy raised her hand to gesture for the floor manager, Mr. Coker rushed through the crowd, his face looking pale and sweating heavily in his formal suit. He had been invited as a minor contractor, and seeing Ada at a front-row table had sent him into a state of total panic. Madam BC, please do not strain your voice at all, Mr. Coker whispered frantically, stepping between BC and Ada while glaring at the young girl with cold malice. Ada, Mr. Coker said quickly, forcing a nervous smile. There must be some misunderstanding. Perhaps we should speak outside before this becomes disruptive. Ada did not say a single word this time. She simply sat with self-possession, her silence carrying a quiet dignity that made Mr. Coker's aggressive words sound incredibly empty. True character does not need to shout in the marketplace. It stands firmly on the truth, while the storm of arrogance blows itself out. Before Mr. Coker could reach for Ada's arm, the heavy double doors at the back of the stage opened wide, and a line of 6 private security guards in dark suits marched into the room, forming a strict perimeter around the central podium. The main lights in the ballroom dimmed slowly, and a deep, powerful spotlight focused straight on the microphone stand. The Master of Ceremonies stepped forward, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please protect your silence and stand up as we welcome the Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of Ade Bello Holdings, Mr. Tunde, accompanied by the Executive Grand Matriarch of the board, Madam Bello. The entire crowd stood up instantly, clapping vigorously as Tunde stepped onto the stage, dressed in an immaculate, bespoke tuxedo, his face holding a sharp, unbendable expression of authority. Beside him walked his mother, looking incredibly graceful in a magnificent traditional lace garment, her silver hair shining like a crown under the bright stage lights. BC stopped her, shouting instantly, her face instantly shifting from raw anger into a wide, flattering smile as she prepared to bow before the most powerful billionaire in the city, completely unaware that the consequences had just snapped shut on her entire existence. The entire grand ballroom fell into a deep, respectful silence as Madame Bello and her son Tunde walked slowly toward the center of the main stage. Bissy stood perfectly still at table number 4, her hands clasped together in total anticipation as she prepared to flash her most beautiful, flattering smile toward the podium. She looked over at her father, Chief Adeyemi, who was already smoothing down his silk agbada gown, getting ready to step forward the moment their family name was called for the official signing ceremony. Mr. Coker stood right behind them, his breath coming in short, nervous gasps as he kept his eyes glued to the expensive leather shoes of the billionaire chairman, hoping to catch even a single nod of approval from the high towers of corporate power. Tunde adjusted the high-quality microphone on the stand, his sharp eyes sweeping over the massive crowd of dignitaries before settling directly on table number 4. "Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep, gravelly voice carrying a remarkable weight of authority that echoed clearly through every corner of the hall. "Tonight is not just a night to celebrate a corporate merger or a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition across Lagos State. Tonight is a night of ethical review, a night where we look closely at the foundational ethics of the people who represent our brands in the public square." Madame Bello stepped closer to the microphone, her silver hair catching the golden glow of the chandeliers as she looked down at Bisi with an unshakable, penetrating gaze. Bisi felt a sudden, cold shiver drop into her stomach as she noticed the elderly woman's eyes locking straight onto her face, her flattering smile frozen instantly on her lips, her mind spinning into a state of total confusion as she stared at the magnificent traditional lace garment and the expensive diamond necklace resting on Madame Bello's chest. That lace was worth more than her entire boutique shopping budget for the year, but the face wearing it was exactly the same face she had aggressively ordered her security guard to discard into the muddy street just 48 hours ago. "Father, look at the chairman's mother," Bisi whispered, her voice cracking with a sudden panic that made Chief Adeyemi look at her with deep concern. "That is the old woman from Admiralty Way, the one from the rain." Before Chief Adeyemi could process his daughter's terrified words, Madame Bello spoke into the microphone, her voice remarkably calm, smooth and clear. "2 days ago, I walked through the high-end shopping of the city, dressed as a simple local grandmother, seeking nothing but a few minutes of shelter from a brutal evening downpour," Madame Bello stated, her words causing a low murmur of shock to ripple through the elite crowd. "I was met with extreme malice by an individual who believed her temporary family wealth gave her the legal right to treat an elderly citizen like moving garbage on the road. She threatened my safety, mocked my traditional attire, and ordered her associates to throw me into the gutter, simply because my presence was ruining her view of luxury." The ballroom became so quiet that the gentle hum of the central air conditioner sounded like a roar. Bice's face turned pale, her knees trembling violently beneath her blue designer gown, as she felt the judgmental eyes of the entire business community slowly turning toward her table. Madame Bello lifted her hand slowly, pointing a dignified finger straight toward table number 3, where Ada was sitting in perfect silence. But in that exact moment of absolute darkness, a young lady who earned a tiny manual wage at that same boutique stepped out into the freezing rain. Madame Bello continued, her voice rising with a profound emotional depth. "She did not know my name, She did not know my son's bank account balance, and she risked her own livelihood by standing between me and my oppressor. She wrapped her own dry jacket around my shoulders, gave me her water, and gave away her very last transport money just to ensure an old stranger could reach her home safely. The Grand Matriarch declared, her eyes shining with true pride. Tun stepped forward, his face turning into a hard line of cold steel as he took over the microphone. That young lady is Miss Ada Okafor, and she is the true embodiment of human dignity and nobility. In this country, Tunde announced, his voice booming through the high-quality speakers like a thunderclap, my corporate board has completed a full investigation into the events of that night, and we have discovered that the boutique manager, Mr. Coker, fired Miss Ada permanently for protecting my mother, just to appease the arrogant demands of Chief Adeyemi's daughter, Bisi. Chief Adeyemi spun around to face his daughter, his eyes wide with an absolute fury that made Bisi step back in total terror. Bisi, what is the meaning of this nonsense? What did you do on Admiralty Way? He roared in a low, furious whisper that was heard by everyone at the adjacent tables. Bisi could not answer at all. Her throat was completely dry. Her tongue frozen as she watched Tunde lift a heavy manila folder from the podium. Therefore, as the Chief Executive Officer of Ade Bello Holdings, I am announcing that Adeyemi Global Structures will not be awarded the proposed $3 million interior decoration contract. Our procurement review found that the agreement had not yet been executed, and the vendor conduct review is now complete. Tunde stated with finality, a business that rewards the destruction of human character has no place in our hospitality network, and your corporate access passes are revoked from this exact minute. Mr. Coker felt the floor disappear beneath his feet, his mind fracturing into total panic as Tunde's sharp eyes locked onto his trembling form. As for you, Mr. Coker, the boutique's ownership group has received the witness statements and employment records from that night. Tunde added, your unlawful salary deduction, retaliation, and dismissal of Ada are now under formal review. The owners have suspended you pending an independent investigation, and Ada will have access to legal advice regarding the wages withheld from her. Bisi slid slowly back into her chair, her diamonds feeling heavier than lead weights as the glittering illusion of her untouchable social status completely collapsed into a pile of public disgrace before the entire Lagos elite crowd. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was like a thick blanket, suffocating every bit of arrogance left in Bisi's chest. She sat still at table number 4, staring at the podium where Tunde stood with authority. Chief Adeyemi's face was dark, with an intense fury that his daughter had never seen before in her entire 26 years of life. He slammed his heavy open palm against the white linen tablecloth, causing the silver forks and knives to rattle loudly. Look at the massive shame you have brought upon my head and my entire business legacy today, Bisi, he hissed in a low, dangerous voice that made her tremble violently. $3 million down the drain in a single second, all because you cannot control your useless pride against an ordinary citizen. Bisi swallowed hard, her tears finally overflowing and smearing her expensive makeup as she looked around the room. Every eye in the hall was fixed on her, displaying a mixture of deep disgust and cold mockery. Across the narrow aisle, Mr. Coker was already on his knees on the polished floor, completely ignoring his wet suit trousers as he crawled a few inches toward the stage. Chairman, please. I am begging you in the name of the Almighty God, do not terminate my commercial lease, Mr. Coker pleaded, his voice cracking with a total panic that sounded incredibly wild. I have 24 employees working under me, and my entire life savings are tied up in that boutique property on Admiralty Way. Tunde did not even look down at him. He simply waved his hand gently, and two tall security guards immediately stepped forward, lifting Mr. Coker by his arms and guiding him quietly out of the rear exit doors. Tunde turned back to the microphone, his expression softening completely as he looked down at table number 3. "Miss Ada Okafor, please step up to the stage," Tunde said softly, his voice carrying a deep, comforting warmth that made Ada's heart skip a beat. Ada stood up slowly, adjusting the simple fabric of her black borrowed dress, her steps very deliberate and calm as she walked up the carpeted stairs. The entire crowd began to clap vigorously, a loud, thunderous sound of genuine honor that filled the massive room from wall to wall. Madame Bello reached out, taking Ada's hands into her own with a profound respect that made Bissy choke on her own breath. "My daughter, the seed of kindness you planted in the rain has grown into a mighty tree of honor tonight," the Grand Matriarch said, her voice echoing clearly through the speaker network inside the hall. Chief Adeyemi stood up from table number 4, his hand grabbing Bisis' wrist with a grip that felt like tight iron bands. "Stand up right now, Bisi, and follow me to that stage," he commanded, his voice cold as ice. Bissy stumbled forward, her high heels catching the hem of her blue midnight gown, as her father dragged her across the aisle toward the central podium. The crowd stopped clapping instantly, the room dropping back into a tense, frozen silence, as the wealthy chief brought his cascading daughter to face the young girl they had tried to erase. "Chairman Tunde, Madame Bello, please accept our deepest corporate and personal apologies for this immense disturbance," Chief Adeyemi said, bowing his head deeply before the podium. "I am personally tracking every contract we hold, and I will ensure my daughter learns what it means to respect every human life fully now." He turned to Bisi, his eyes burning with an unbendable command. "Look at Ada right now. Look her in the eye and say the words." Bisi lifted her head slowly, her face pale and soaked with tears of total humiliation. The illusion of her untouchable wealth was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, naked shame that forced her to see reality clearly for the very first time. "Ada, please. I am truly sorry for how I treated you at the boutique and on the street," Bissy whispered, her voice shaking so hard she could barely find her breath. "I was blind. I was completely foolish, and I did not know your worth at all." She looked down at her own expensive diamond ring, realizing that all her millions could not hide the ugly nature of her actions. Before this gathering of important leaders, in this massive hotel room now. Ada looked at Bisi, her eyes reflecting a deep, quiet grace that held zero malice or desire for violent revenge. "Madam Bisi, you did not wrong me at all. You wronged the basic dignity that God gave to every human being in this world," Ada replied quietly, her voice smooth and steady. "A person's value is never written on their clothing or inside their bank account balance. And until you understand that an ordinary cleaner deserves the same respect as a billionaire, your wealth will always remain completely empty." Madame Bello nodded head slowly in absolute agreement, her hand resting gently on Ada's shoulder. The lesson was deep, reaching far beyond a simple business punishment, cutting straight into the moral fabric of high society. Chief Adeyemi closed his eyes in deep shame, knowing that the words of this poor village girl were heavier than all the millions resting now. Tunda stepped forward, opening the leather folder to reveal the transition papers. "Miss Ada, our group is establishing a humanitarian foundation with an endowment of the Naira equivalent of $500,000, Tunde announced proudly. "This foundation will help vulnerable families facing medical debt at Lagoon Hospital. We would like to offer you a paid fellowship in its community support team, with professional training, independent supervision, and a clear path to earn greater responsibility. Ada stared at the documents, her hands trembling as her father's legacy of honor bore fruit. The long night of suffering was completely over, and a new dawn of justice had arrived. The Grand Continental Hotel ballroom erupted into a final standing ovation that lasted for 3 minutes, the sound of clapping hands washing over the stage, like waves of a rising tide. Ada stood beside Madame Bello, her eyes shining with quiet tears as she looked down at the massive folder containing the fellowship and training documents. She could see her mother sitting at table number 3, her face completely bright with an unshakable joy, her hands clasped together in a silent prayer of gratitude to the Almighty God. Ada took a deep, steady breath, her voice carrying a beautiful, clear rhythm through the speakers. "Thank you, Chairman Tunde. Thank you, Madame Bello. I accept the opportunity, and I promise to learn the work properly and treat every family with the dignity my father taught me to respect." Chief Adeyemi did not waste a single second further in the glittering hall, his face remaining remarkably tight as he turned his back on the central podium. He dragged Bissy out through the heavy mahogany doors, her blue designer gown trailing limply along the carpet like a broken flag. Her diamonds no longer carrying any power to save her family from the devastating financial fallout. The loss of the proposed contract would force Chief Adeyemi's company to answer difficult questions from its partners and board, but the consequences would unfold through ordinary business review rather than instant public spectacle. Bissy sobbed quietly in the back seat of her father's vehicle as they drove back to Lekki, realizing that the ordinary cleaner she had tried to discard like garbage in the rain was now the exact person holding the executive keys to her entire social circle. On Friday morning, the boutique's ownership group opened a formal workplace investigation. Mr. Coker was suspended while payroll records, staff statements, and security footage were reviewed. Ada was contacted through independent counsel and informed that the withheld wages would be restored immediately, without requiring her to surrender any legal rights. Several weeks later, the investigation concluded that Coker had retaliated against an employee, imposed an unauthorized deduction, and repeatedly ignored workplace conduct rules. His employment was terminated through the company's disciplinary process. Meanwhile, several months later, inside a meeting room at the newly transitioned Marina Hospitality Group, Ada was taking part in a supervised case review session as a fellow in the Ade Bello Humanitarian Trust. The room was completely professional, filled with a warm golden light from the large windows that looked out over the lagoon, the table holding a carefully screened group of medical assistance applications from the lagoon hospital system. Tunde sat quietly in the back corner, a look of profound admiration on his face, as he watched Ada present her recommendations to the experienced program and compliance staff responsible for approving distributions from the fund. She did not look like a poor village girl at all. She looked like a true leader, a woman whose inner spirit had been tested in the fierce fires of adversity and had come out as pure, unbending gold. Ada signed the final clearance certificate for a young mother whose medical bill had been outstanding for 82 days. A peaceful smile touching her lips as she closed the file. As the meeting drew to a quiet close, Madame Bello walked into the room, holding a small basket of fresh local chin-chin and warm tea for the staff. "My daughter, you have done an excellent job today," the Grand Matriarch said softly, placing her hand gently over Ada's braided crown. Ada looked up, her voice smooth and steady. "Mama, I am only doing the work that keeps our humanity alive. Because a city without compassion is just a collection of cold concrete towers. Looking back at the extraordinary chain of events that unfolded from that rainy evening on Admiralty Way, one cannot help but reflect deeply on the invisible laws that govern human behavior and society. We often live in a modern world that is dangerously obsessed with temporary status, designer labels, and the superficial thickness of a person's bank account balance. People like BC and Mr. Coker move through life with a blind, unchecked arrogance, genuinely believing that their financial security gives them a legal license to treat the less fortunate as invisible, second-class citizens. They forget that the structures of wealth are incredibly fragile, and that a single unexpected turn of events can shatter the grandest illusion within less than 48 hours. This powerful narrative serves as a timeless educational reminder that human dignity is entirely absolute and non-negotiable under any circumstances. The respect we extend to a vulnerable stranger, an elderly citizen, or an ordinary manual laborer in the pouring rain is the only true measure of our internal nobility as human beings. True grace is never found in the premium leather of an expensive shoe. It is found in the clean heart that is willing to risk its own comfort to protect another person from humiliation. As we walk through our own busy lives in this modern society, let us always remember that every seed of kindness or cruelty we sow into the dark soil of today will inevitably grow, echo back, and determine our ultimate harvest tomorrow.